Asking in a Friday Night Live People's poll, as the King tonight recovers in hospital, should Charles share more of his duties with William and prepare his son for the throne? Nina Mishkov, you want to guess how many percentage say yes, that Charles should share his duties with William? What's your guess, percentage out of 100?
35.
OK, you think, and then what do you think, percentage, Peter Lloyd?
20.
20. Well, you're both wrong, because 83.3% of my viewers and listeners say that Charles should share his duties. 16.7% say no. So you're all backing a bit of help for our lovely king. By the way, can I just add that we wish him a speedy recovery in hospital, as well as our fabulous Princess Catherine. Now, the broadcast regulator Ofcom is to gain more powers over BBC online services, including the BBC News website, amid concerns about the organisation's impartiality. Meanwhile, a former government advisor and eminent epidemiologist, Professor Mark Woolhouse, has told the UK COVID inquiry this week that the BBC was allowed to misrepresent the risk posed by COVID to most people to boost public support for lockdown. He lambasted the corporation for having repeatedly reported rare deaths or illnesses among healthy adults as if they were the norm. He said this created the misleading impression among BBC News viewers at the start of the pandemic that we're all at risk and the virus does not discriminate. Of course, we discovered that it very much does. So can we still trust the BBC? I'm delighted to welcome former BBC radio star Alex Dyke. Alex, great to have you on the show. Is the BBC politically biased, do you think?
I think it's impossible for the BBC to be impartial all the time, Mark. There's 21,000 people working for the BBC, and we're human, and we sometimes can't help if our opinions spill over into the workplace. I think the BBC try, and maybe they try too hard. But it's a tough one for them. How can the BBC not be biased?
What about this idea, of course, the top epidemiologist and advisor to the government saying that they essentially exaggerated the threat of COVID in order to support the case for lockdowns? That shouldn't be happening, particularly from our national state broadcaster, should it?
Well, it's funny that I heard about this today, and I have bored my family for Britain all through COVID. When the BBC News at 6 o'clock came on, I would say to them, I reckon, and I've got no proof of this, and no one at the BBC ever did this, as someone who worked in the media like you for many years, I said to my family, I think they are laying this on with the trowel because they don't want people going out, they don't want people mixing, and I think someone at the government has said something to the big news organisations, particularly the BBC, that we need to frighten people to get them to stay in. I always thought that was the case. I think this is very interesting hearing this today.
Definitely. Alex, let's bring in my brilliant Friday friends, Peter Lloyd and Nina Mishkov. Peter, do you think the BBC has an impartiality problem?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely irredeemable. Alex was talking about there being 21,000 employees. Well, I would estimate that probably about 90% of those are activists rather than journalists. I think it's long been partial. I think it's long been the media operations for the Labour Party, and I think it's long been a cause of discontent amongst the media narrative. So I would quite happily see it collapse.
Wow, Nina, you're not agreeing with Peter.
That's so ludicrous and over-exaggerated.
I don't think so.
I'm sure you don't think so because you've just said it. But the thing is that Lucy Fraser, who's the Culture Secretary, was banging on to Kay Burley on Sky about how biased the BBC were against the government, and now you're saying the BBC are biased in favour of the government. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot have it both ways. They're damned if they do, and you're damned if they don't. They really, it's an impossible task.
Alex Dyke, did you identify any bias when you worked at the organisation? You were a very, very popular star on BBC local radio, and your army of listeners not happy when you ceased to be on air. But did you identify bias at the organisation?
No, not at all. I think the BBC tried so hard. I think they are so nervous of getting it wrong. And you're absolutely right. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. People on the left think the BBC way too far to the right, and vice versa. I think the BBC try, and I think they've got to the point now where they're trying so hard, they just can't move forward. And as I said to your producer before we came on air, I think they're going to have to look at this in the future and maybe step back a little bit, because it's only a matter of time before, with the new government charter, the BBC are probably going to have to end up taking ads and running sponsored programmes.
What about those woke storylines in Doctor Who, though, and this sort of progressivism that seems to have infiltrated so much of the output? Look at the Today programme, which strikes me as very anti-Brexit, very anti-Tory.
Yeah, the wokeness of the media, not just the BBC, but particularly the BBC, drives me crazy. And towards the end of my I was worried of saying something quite innocent in case there were complaints, and I was hauled over the coals. A lot of my I know felt the same, like, what can you say? And in the end, it was easier for me because I just did music shows. So it was...
But you were worried you might have made a joke and you'd get cancelled. You made an innocent remark about breastfeeding. The BBC suspended you for a week.
I know, and it was a joke. What I said, I mean, I've been married twice. 3 children, they were all breastfed. It was a joke.
I've seen the pictures.
It was done some years ago when, Jeremy Clarkson was on Top Gear and Chris Moores was winding people up on Radio 1. So it was done in another era.
Alex, where can my viewers and listeners hear you?
Well, I'm going to be here, there and everywhere. I'm going on tour with Fred Dyke in theatres around the UK doing our Ronnie Edge about the praise. So watch out for me in a theatre near you.
Top man, Alex, we'll catch up soon.